Good morning, class. Today we're going to be learning about the relationship between your genotype and phenotypes. For this lesson, please make sure that you watched the Ed puzzle yesterday on dominant and recessive traits. So yesterday in the video, we learned about this chemical called PTC. PTC is a chemical that tastes bitter to some people, but for other people, PTC has no taste. And the video reviewed that people who can taste the bitterness in PTC, that's a dominant trait. And if you can't taste PTC, that's a recessive trait. Right? And remember that dominant traits normally overrule recessive traits. Okay. So being that you receive half of your genes from mom and half of your genes from dad, this unique combination makes your genotype. Your genotype are the genes that you receive from your parents for a specific trait. So your genotypes are made up of two genes. We're going to represent the genes with letters, where capital letters represent dominant genes and lowercase letters represent recessive genes. Okay, so in the case of PCT, we're going to choose to use the letter T. So capital T is going to represent the dominant gene for tasting the bitterness in PCT, and a lowercase t is going to represent the recessive gene for not being able to taste anything at all. So because you have two genes for each trait, your genotype can be one of three possibilities. Okay, we can have two dominant genes, we can have a dominant and a recessive gene, or we can have two recessive genes. The first one and the third one, since they have the same, either they're both dominant or they're both recessive, we call these homozygous genotypes. Homozygous. Homo means the same. So they're going to either be dominant or they're going to be recessive. The one in the middle, okay, since it has a blend of the two, it has one dominant, it has one recessive, we're going to call that heterozygous. Hetero means different. Heterozygous. Now, each one of these genotypes is going to result in a physical appearance. So now we bring in phenotype. So phenotype is a physical representation of the genotype. So remember, we have three possible genotypes. We have this homozygous dominant genotype, heterozygous genotype, and homozygous recessive genotype. Each one of these is going to result in a phenotype, a physical characteristic. Okay, so for the first two right here, since there's at least one dominant allele, it's going to be the dominant phenotype, which in this case is being able to taste PCT. The bottom one here, since it's homozygous recessive, it has only recessive alleles, it's going to be the recessive phenotype, which is not tasting PCT. So you can see here how the genotype directly affects the phenotype, the physical characteristics, and you have to understand what's dominant and what's recessive in order to determine that. Okay, so let's look at this question down here. How is it possible for two parents who taste PCT to have a child who can't taste PCT? All right, so let's look at the end of it first. A child who can't taste PCT, what would their genotype be? Well, someone who can't taste PCT, that's recessive. Okay, so that's going to be two lowercase t's, homozygous recessive. So that means that they received a recessive allele from one parent and another recessive allele from the other parent. So that means each parent had to have at least one recessive gene in their genotype. Well, this question or the statement also said that both parents could taste PCT. So tasting PCT is a dominant trait. So that means that the parents also had to have had at least one dominant gene in their genotype. So they each had a capital T. All right. So this is how it's possible for each of the parents to be able to taste PCT, but the offspring cannot taste PCT because the offspring received one recessive gene from each parent. All right. So having a heterozygous genotype allows you to pass on a recessive gene to your offspring. And if both parents are heterozygous, there is a possibility that the offspring will have the recessive trait. In a later lesson, we're going to learn about Punnett squares and how we can use Punnett squares to predict the actual probability of having or not having offspring with certain traits. Okay, make sure after you've watched this video a couple of times that you go in and you take the quiz in Google Classroom to show your level of understanding. Thanks, and look forward to the next video. Bye.